You really think I won't press charges just because it was a baby's milk you drugged? Valora Finch, vice president of the Briar Glen Ridge HOA, didn't flinch. She stood on my porch like she owned it, clipboard resting against her hip like a badge of moral authority. She even had the audacity to glance down at Elia's cradle and shake her head, as if my daughter's existence offended the neighborhood guidelines. I was conducting a visual check for code violations, she said smoothly, not even blinking. It's not my fault if certain families leave personal items unsecured. I stared at her. She didn't know, not yet. That bottle you touched still pings back to my wife's forensic server. Your print's already been lifted. Her eyes finally narrowed. Just a twitch, but it was there. The first crack in her mask. If you've ever been underestimated because you kept your head down, if you've ever had someone hurt your child and smile like it's policy, subscribe now. This is where people like that learn who they're messing with. My name's Thorne Elric. I'm not a fighter. I'm a forensic-grade digital intrusion analyst. I make a living stopping people from getting into places they shouldn't. Corporate systems, city infrastructure, federal prototypes. You'd be shocked how many systems still run on legacy firmware, which is exactly how Valora got in. She used an override master key from a system that was supposed to be phased out 2 years ago, and she used it not to break into a building, but to poison a newborn. My newborn. Elia came into the world 6 weeks early with fragile lungs and zero margin for error. That porch cradle, the one Valora called a visual disruption, is the only place she can breathe fresh air without exposure to mold or heat stroke. The UV tent, the sensor-latched warmer, the dual temp bottle unit, every part of it is calibrated to keep her alive. So when her bottle came back with trace diphenhydramine, it wasn't just sabotage, it was attempted suffocation. Mayella, my wife, didn't even need to ask me what happened. She's a forensic chemist with the state. While I pulled smart lock logs, she was already bagging the bottle for analysis. Partial fingerprints on the cap, trace transfer residue on the rim. A full compound breakdown was underway before the ER even called us with the talk screen. The logs told the rest of the story. 2:31 a.m., gate unlock event triggered via mechanical override. 2:31:07, bottle removed from thermal unit. 2:31:45, bottle returned now. 1.2 degree flower. 4:12 a.m., Elia vomits. ER admission at 4:47. 5:36 a.m., pediatric toxicology report, trace sedative detected. We didn't need to catch her red-handed. She left a perfect print trail like a novice. And today, she came back. She walked up our porch steps in broad daylight, probably expecting us to be too scared to confront her. She didn't know Mayella had already flagged the evidence to the state's child welfare intake team. She didn't know I had offloaded our SmartGate firmware logs to a cold storage chain, complete with the legacy key ping that linked back to a restricted HOA access table. And she sure as hell didn't know that the cradle she put her hand on was hand-carved by Mayella's father, who died before Elia was born, but whose initials are burned into the base of the frame. The only place we could safely let Elia see sunlight was now the crime scene. You call it clutter, I said, stepping closer. But that shade kept my daughter's oxygen levels from dropping. That formula station you tried to shut down, it's been saving her life since the day we brought her home. Valora blinked, slow and unbothered. We all have to follow the rules, Mr. Elric. If you can't handle that, maybe this isn't the right community for your needs. Then she turned, calm, confident, completely unaware she'd just buried herself in evidence. But, she'd learn, I don't file neighborhood complaints. I submit sealed forensic packets to the Attorney General. The fine was taped to the inside of our front door. No knock, no email. Just a printed notice from the HOA with Valora's name signed in looping ink at the bottom, like she was doing us a favor. Violation, non-conforming personal equipment in public view. Beneath that was a picture of Elia's porch station, the UV shade, the cooler unit, even her toy sloth clipped to the cradle rail. Valora had circled it all in red marker. She called it visual disorder. I called it medically necessary. The HOA bylaws didn't mention infant formula stations, because no one ever thought they'd need to. But Valora didn't care about that. She only cared that it looked off-brand for the neighborhood. That was her term. Off-brand? I found Mayella in the kitchen, already holding a copy of the same notice. They'd stuffed one into her windshield wiper at work. She wants us to pull down the entire station, she said flatly. Even the shade, claims it's creating community discomfort. Elia wheezed once in her sleep. I adjusted the tiny humidifier next to the bassinet and tried to keep my hands from shaking. You sent the evidence packet? I asked quietly. Maela nodded. Chain sealed, labeled. It's going to CPS first, then the AG's office. They'll move fast if they match the print. I wanted to believe that, but Valora was still walking around with a badge and a clipboard like nothing happened. Later that day, while I was resetting the gate logs, I saw her. She was walking the edge of the cul-de-sac, holding a camera and taking pictures of a neighbor's patio lights. That neighbor, Rhonda, 4 houses down, was a new mom too. Her kid was 6 months old. Rhonda saw me watching, gave me a helpless shrug, then turned and disappeared inside. I wasn't the only one she was targeting. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. By the end of the week, the HOA website had posted a new community wellness memo authored by Valora herself. In it, she warned about infant-related equipment on porches that may attract crime, bugs, or social disruption. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. Half the neighborhood knew exactly who she meant. I didn't respond. I added 2 new sensors to the back fence line. Maela, meanwhile, received a call from the state lab. They'd confirmed partial latent prints on the cap of the tampered bottle. The surface compound showed low-grade antihistamine residue, consistent with sedative misuse. Diphenhydramine, again. Not enough to knock out an adult, more than enough to compromise a baby's breathing. The sample was a match to a fingerprint stored from a public credentialing file, someone who once held a municipal inspection license. Valora Finch, the lab tech said, registered for food safety inspection in 2006, lapsed in 2009. Maela thanked them, wrote it down, and quietly slid the file into our case binder. Elia's oxygen levels had stabilized by then, but we still hadn't moved her back to the porch. Not yet. Every time I looked at that cradle, I imagined Valora's hand on it again. The same hand that held a clipboard while she talked about how new parents can forget what normal looks like. We weren't forgetting anything. I was remembering too much. By Friday, another notice was delivered. This one warned that non-compliance with visual regulations would result in a daily fine of $200 until the items in question were removed. Maela read it, set it aside, and started running a chain of authority map using the HOA's own meeting logs. She was tracing voting records, overrides, and legacy access codes. I watched her highlight Valora's name 6 times in the same column. She's overriding board votes, she muttered. There's no resolution on these fines. She's issuing them solo. We both sat with that for a while. Neither of us said the word yet, but the word was coming. Tampering, felony, child endangerment. The porch was quiet now, too quiet. No soft rocking cradle, no drowsy hum of the UV shade, just a hollow kind of stillness where my daughter used to sleep. And Valora still walked by like none of it mattered. She was playing a game with HOA rules. We were building a case for the state. I saw him again the next morning, Darren Solvane, the HOA's junior facilities tech. He was standing at the edge of our driveway, tapping something into a small handheld scanner. His polo shirt had the Briar Glen Ridge logo stitched over the chest. The way he kept glancing toward our porch gate told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't there to fix anything. He was logging another access event. Need something? I asked from the top of the steps. Darren flinched, just barely, but didn't meet my eyes. Just updating gate calibration logs, he mumbled. Routine check. I didn't move. Just let the silence stretch, the kind of silence that makes liars sweat. He shifted his weight. Valora wants legacy access confirmed across all units before the quarterly inspection. That's all. That confirmed it. The override key, the one used the night the bottle was tampered with, was still active, and Darren was maintaining it. He knew. He probably didn't know what had happened to Elia, but he knew someone accessed the gate when they shouldn't have, and he'd said nothing. You ever have kids, Darren? I asked. He blinked. No, sir. I nodded. Then you wouldn't understand what it feels like to find out someone put something in your newborn's bottle, something that nearly stopped her breathing. His face drained of color. I'm not accusing you, I said. But if you're being told to run legacy keys that were supposed to be retired, You might want to start thinking about who's going to end up holding the bag. He stood frozen for a second longer, then turned and walked briskly down the sidewalk. Didn't even finish scanning the next unit. I didn't chase him. I didn't need to. The guilt was already working its way through. Mayella came out a few minutes later, holding her phone. "Lab's pushing the fingerprint match forward," she said. Priority flag came through after they saw the infant tox report. I felt a pulse of something cold and sharp run through me. Not fear, focus. Valora hadn't just crossed a line. She'd dragged someone else with her. I looked at the porch gate again. The override slot was just below the regular keypad. Barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Our unit was supposed to have that feature disabled when we moved in. I'd signed the form myself, but Valora had kept one of the old master keys, and now I had someone on the inside who knew. That afternoon, I walked the neighborhood, something I rarely did. Rhonda was out with her stroller, bouncing her son gently as she walked in slow loops around the cul-de-sac. When she saw me, her eyes flicked to the baby monitor unit I'd clipped to the rail on our porch, then back to me. "She fined me too," she said before I could speak. "Said my baby swing was a lawn hazard. Can you believe that?" I could. "She's trying to intimidate people," I said. Rhonda nodded. "She said I should conform to the property vision if I wanted to raise kids here, like motherhood is a branding issue." We stood in silence for a few moments, two parents who'd done nothing wrong but raise our kids in the open. "Just be careful," I told her. "Lock up anything she might use to issue a violation. Cameras, too." She gave me a curious look. "You think she'd—" I didn't finish the sentence, just shook my head and walked back toward home. At the gate, I paused. There was a new scrape along the latch, faint, curved. The kind of mark that shows up when a key you're not supposed to have has been used too many times. I took a picture, checked the time. Then I sat down in front of my laptop and pulled up the server logs. Darren was scared. Rhonda was next. And the override key left digital fingerprints, too. It was only a matter of time before one of them cracked. The next notice wasn't slipped quietly onto our door like the others. It was hand-delivered. Valora stood there herself, right on the front steps, clipboard in hand, eyes bright with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged. "This is your final warning," she said, tapping the paper with the back of her pen. "The infant station must be removed by end of day. The fines will increase to $400 per violation, per day, starting tomorrow." She handed the paper to Mayella, not even looking at me. I was standing behind the doorframe, arms crossed. Mayella didn't take the paper. She kept both hands at her sides. Valora waited a beat, then dropped it at her feet and turned without another word. When the door closed, Mayella spoke first. "She's escalating." "She's desperate," I said. "She knows something's coming." Mayella nodded, then bent to pick up the paper, not to read it, but to slide it into a sealed folder. "More evidence," she murmured. That afternoon, a motion alert pinged my phone. I checked the porch camera. Valora was back, alone again. But this time, she wasn't facing the house. She stood in front of the porch station with her back to us, phone in hand, snapping angled photos of the UV canopy and shade panel. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself, just logged the visit like a field inspector. I opened the door slowly, just enough to be seen but not heard. She didn't turn around. She took one more photo and walked away. When I stepped outside 10 minutes later, I found something tucked into the corner of Elia's cradle, a laminated pamphlet titled "Keeping Neighborhoods Safe, Guidelines for a Visual Standard, HOA Issued." Nothing illegal about it, but inside was a handwritten note on the last page. "Not every family fits in here. Do what's best for your child." No signature. I scanned the fingerprints. They were smudged and partial, not enough for a match, but it was enough to make Mayella's hands curl into fists when she read it. "She thinks if she says it's sweet, it's not a threat," she said. "She left that inside our gate. That's criminal trespass." "And intent," I said. "Documented." We logged it, time-stamped it, photographed it with the porch camera ID code in frame. Everything would go into the case file. Meanwhile, Valora filed another formal complaint, this time with the city zoning liaison. She claimed our porch modifications violated setback codes and posed health hazards related to stagnant air. The complaint didn't mention Elia. It only described our home as a case of recurring visual and structural noncompliance. Mayella forwarded the complaint to the state CPS office with the growing file. She included the new threat, the photo sequence, and the modified bottle's evidence status. The response was immediate. We received a call that evening from a CPS liaison requesting a formal in-person interview. They were opening a child endangerment case file with intent to escalate to the state attorney general. The fingerprint match had cleared confirmation. It belonged to Valora Finch. We'd been waiting for that call. Valora's fingerprint, lifted from the bottle cap, had survived both degradation and post-handling contamination. Mayella's lab training had preserved the sample perfectly. The system cross-referenced it with an old inspection credential file Valora held during her brief tenure with the city's health compliance department. There it was: print, location, substance match, motive, the bottle, the override key, the porch scrape, the printed threats. It wasn't just HOA harassment anymore. It was a criminal case. I looked out the front window after the call ended. The street was quiet. Sprinklers ticked along perfectly edged lawns. A couple jogged past with earbuds in, oblivious. You never know what was unfolding behind the blinds. But the air felt different now. Something had shifted. She wasn't just playing HOA God anymore. She was running out of time. The email arrived just after 9 a.m., buried between two HOA newsletters and a billing reminder from our waste services. But this one was different. Subject line: match confirmed, formal case opened. It came from the State Forensic Intake Division, addressed to Mayella. The body was short, clinical really, but it said everything we needed to hear. The latent fingerprint lifted from the tampered baby bottle had been officially confirmed. Indexed match: Valora Finch, former municipal health inspector. File archived and retrievable under her prior public licensing record. They'd opened an active child endangerment file and issued a request for a joint intake interview. The state was in. Mayella set her phone down with a soft exhale, like she'd been holding her breath for a week straight. She didn't say anything, just got up, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a tamper-evident evidence sleeve. She slid the printout inside, pressed the seal, and labeled it with clean, steady handwriting. Finch match primary A. I didn't realize my hands were clenched until she looked at me and said, "We have to move fast," before she realizes how deep she's in. She was right. Valora had been playing her little control games for too long: fines, pamphlets, verbal threats. That's what she was used to, power without consequence. But now the rules had changed. Now it was a felony. That afternoon, I decided to check the smart lock logs again, line by line. The override entry from 2:31 a.m. was already flagged, but I hadn't looked deeper at what happened after that. When I reviewed the metadata, tied to the gate's manual lockout sequence, I noticed something subtle: a mismatch. The override event didn't just open the gate, it triggered a firmware handshake that shouldn't exist. The system tried to authenticate the access against a key that had been blacklisted 17 months ago, following the HOA's switch to updated security protocols. I ran the trace again. Same result. The system recorded a deprecated key being used, one still tagged to the Master Access Table, Legacy Zone A. That wasn't just unauthorized, that was illegal use of a retired security credential. I checked the HOA changelog. Buried in the meeting notes was a resolution from over a year ago. Legacy Zone A, master keys to be collected, deactivated, and destroyed. Valora had signed the resolution. She hadn't just ignored the rule, she violated one she'd authored. Mayella sat beside me, reading the resolution from my screen. "Can you pull the digital key signature, match it to the lock?" I nodded. "Already pinged it to the archive node. The signature's still valid. It's the same override key logged on our gate." She leaned back in her chair, eyes wide with disbelief. She's been walking into people's properties using a master key she was supposed to destroy. I thought of Rhonda, of Darren, of every house on this street with a child inside, and a porch gate locked only by trust in a system Valora still quietly controlled. "She thinks she's untouchable," I said. "No," Mayella replied. "She thinks no one's paying attention." That night, I stepped out onto the porch to clear my head. The air was still, heavy with late summer heat. The cradle sat untouched, swaddled in silence, its canopy drawn down. I stared at it for a long time. Then I reached for my phone. The screen glowed to life, and I tapped into the system admin panel. I pulled the full override signature logs and exported them to a forensic chain of custody zip, time-stamped, encrypted, read only. I titled it, Cradle Breach 231A Override Key Match. And then I backed it up again. 3 separate servers, cold storage. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was a secure access breach on private residential property, linked to physical tampering of a medical device used to feed a vulnerable infant. We weren't just gathering proof now. We were assembling a prosecutable case. Elia's breathing had stabilized, but we hadn't moved her back to the porch cradle. Not yet. We'd kept the routine the same, UV-filtered window light in the mornings, sterile feeding prep in the kitchen, every item logged and sealed, but the porch remained empty. The cradle sat there like a monument to something we hadn't named yet. I watched her sleep from the hallway, the nasal cannula gently fogging from each exhale. Her tiny chest rose and fell, with the metronome regularity of someone who didn't know a stranger had tried to shut her lungs down. Maella stood behind me, silent. "She doesn't even know," I murmured. "She will," Maella said. "When she's older, she'll know we didn't let it slide." Later that day, we received a formal intake notice from Child Protective Services. They were scheduling a meeting. The tone was different now. They weren't asking. They were preparing for deposition. Maella hung up the phone after the intake interview was confirmed. They're treating this as attempted poisoning with intent. They have our evidence log, the compound analysis, the fingerprint match, and the override key trace. I looked over the chain file she'd printed for review. Everything was clean, time-stamped, certified, annotated. She'd added the new element, the HOA vote log showing Valora's signature on the resolution that decommissioned the master keys. She signed the policy, kept the key, then used it to access the porch after we opted out of override access, I said aloud, walking through it like an analyst, briefing a threat board. Then tampered with medical equipment tied to an immunocompromised infant. Maella didn't need to nod. We were past confirmations. Every piece fit. We had motive, access, timeline, digital signature, physical evidence, toxicology, and a direct link to negligence of a security protocol. And still, Valora hadn't stopped. That evening, another HOA bulletin went out, this time to the entire community mailing list. Subject, safety and aesthetics, important community reminder. She framed it like a public safety issue, again, citing unsecured visible feeding equipment, increased crime risks associated with infant care items on porches, and ongoing investigations into non-compliant residents endangering the community image. Maella scrolled through it, expression flat. She's trying to pre-spin the fallout. She knows it's coming. Let her spin, I said. It won't stop what's about to hit. But it did trigger something I hadn't expected. Rhonda texted me later that night. "Did you get that email from Valora? She's saying someone endangered their own kid." I called her. Rhonda picked up after one ring. "She's accusing you," she said without preamble, or hinting at it. "I don't know. She told people you were under review by the HOA board." "She tampered with our baby's bottle," I said plainly. "She accessed our gate using a master key she was supposed to destroy, and we have the fingerprint to prove it." Silence. Then a soft, shocked, "Jesus." "She's not just targeting us anymore," I added. "Check your locks, check your porch. If she still has override access, she can walk in." "I've seen Darren scanning our gate," Rhonda whispered. "Twice this week. I thought it was routine." "It's not." She let out a shaky breath. Do I call someone?" "Not yet, but if she sends you anything, notes, warnings, complaints, keep them. Photograph. Everything. We're turning over the full file to the state." After the call, I sat down in front of the porch cradle for the first time since that night. The scrape along the latch was still there. The bamboo frame still bore the faint outline of Valora's hand, caught on infrared. I reached underneath and unlocked the mount bolts. Then I carried it inside. Not because we were giving up, because we were closing the trap. Valora wanted us to react, to fight her on her terms, through the HOA's petty violation cycles. But we weren't going to fight in the HOA's arena anymore. The next move was out of her hands. It was late when the knock came, Too late for HOA business, too early for neighborly concern. I opened the door to find Darren Solvane standing there, alone, without his scanner, clipboard, or uniform. He looked smaller without the polo, like the title gave him some armor he'd decided to shed. "I need to talk," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Inside, if that's okay." I stepped aside. He entered quickly, shoulders hunched, hands jammed into his jacket pockets. Mayella watched from the hallway but didn't say a word. Darren sat down at the edge of the couch like he didn't trust the furniture to hold him. "I know what she did," he said finally. "I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought maybe it was just a mistake, some misunderstanding." I stayed quiet. "She told me the override logs were being checked for security inconsistencies. Said the board voted to have me re-enable Legacy Zone A so she could verify functionality." "You mean the override keys that were supposed to be deactivated?" I said. He nodded. "I saw the vote. I knew it wasn't official, but she made it sound like it was just a check. No harm. And then she told me to log yours manually. No digital record, just handwritten forms." "And you did?" Mayella asked, her voice calm. Darren swallowed. "The first time. But then I noticed something. The timestamp of her inspection visit didn't match the logs. She was on your porch the night before the citation was filed, at 2:30 in the morning." Mayella and I exchanged a look. He didn't know the rest, not yet. "She used the override key to open our gate," I said. "We have the smart log. That same night, our daughter was poisoned. Her bottle had trace diphenhydramine in it. And your override system, your manual log, that's what let her in." Darren turned white. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear I didn't know." "But you suspected something was off," I said. "And you didn't report it." His hands shook. "I'm here now, aren't I?" I stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. He reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive, set it on the table between us. "This is a copy of the HOA override registry, the one we're not supposed to show anyone. Valora never submitted the legacy key audit, so the system never flagged it as expired. She's been using it with full privileges, even after the decommission order." Mayella picked it up carefully and placed it into a static sleeve. "There's more," Darren added. "Emails. She told me to remove your family from the override exemption list. Said the board approved it, but the board never met. I checked the timestamps." "She forged the update," he nodded. "It's in the system, quiet, but it's there." That was it, the last link. Not just trespassing, not just tampering. Valora had falsified system access to reauthorize a decommissioned override, bypassed a board vote, entered a property without consent, and handled medical equipment that resulted in a hospitalized child. "Why are you telling us now?" Mayella asked. Darren looked at her, then at me. "Because I saw the news alert about CPS opening an investigation tied to our HOA, he said, and I realized I'm either a witness or an accomplice. I don't want to be the latter." We didn't thank him, not out loud, but we let him leave without questions, without pressure. He'd done what mattered. Mayella spent the next 2 hours compiling everything: the digital override logs, the forged access updates, the registry with legacy keys still active, the email timestamps. She cross-referenced it all with our forensic archive and began prepping the final intake. We were ready. Valora thought no one would dare challenge her clipboard and smile. She didn't count on a systems analyst married to a forensic chemist. And she definitely didn't count on someone from inside the HOA folding. The kitchen table looked more like an evidence board now. Every inch of surface space had been overtaken by printouts, sealed sleeves, thumb drives, and annotated photographs. Each item was labeled in Mayella's crisp handwriting, precise and methodical, like she was still in the lab. In a way she was, except this time, the subject wasn't an unknown offender or a forensic puzzle in an evidence locker. It was Valora Finch, and the victim was our daughter. I cross-checked the override logs one more time, matching the timestamps to the sensor feed metadata. Mayella handed me a printed HOA roster showing board member absences on the night Valora claimed the override reauthorization was approved. Half the board wasn't even in town. "She forged the vote and pushed the system change herself," Mayella said, tapping her pen against the page, and then directed Darren to backdate the logs. I flipped to the new section she'd compiled, cross-referencing Rhonda's security footage timestamps with Valora's complaint logs. "She's been entering other properties too," I muttered. "Not just ours." Maella nodded. Same pattern, override key, no board resolution, no formal complaint until after the visit. She slid another envelope toward me, sealed, addressed, and stamped with tamper tape. For the state AG, she said. Case file, 1 of 3. The other 2 sat nearby. One for CPS, the other for the Department of Regulatory Affairs. We weren't just filing a complaint anymore. We were launching a formal chain escalation. Valora's actions didn't just violate HOA procedures. They invalidated her prior municipal licensing, breached state residential privacy statutes, and, most damning of all, matched a fingerprint on a bottle that had hospitalized our daughter. This is the kind of case that gets statutes rewritten, Maella said, half to herself. She had override access to 26 units, and she used it, off record. I stared at the table, then picked up the photo of Elia's porch cradle, taken the night we brought her home from the NICU. The bamboo frame caught the light. The UV tent stretched over it like a shield. The formula station glowed softly beside it. That setup wasn't just convenience, it was survival. I set the photo down. We need to make sure none of this can get buried, I said. It won't. She handed me the last sealed folder, our personal statement, notarized, signed, and backed by the data log files. All we had left was delivery. We chose the drop-off points carefully. I took the AG file. Maella took the CPS packet. We drove separately, early, no phones, no digital trails. Each envelope was signed in person, time-stamped, receipt logged, no margin for deniability. By the time we returned home, our local server was pinging off its backup cycles. Each log, each video clip, every override timestamp had been archived across 3 locations: our secure server, a cold vault node, and a third-party legal repository. If Valora tried to destroy evidence, she'd be hitting ghosts. We stood in the nursery for a while after that. Elia was sleeping, curled in her post-feeding wrap, the soft hiss of oxygen flow barely audible over the monitor. I'm putting the cradle back out tomorrow, I said. Maella didn't answer right away. Then, softly, I want her to feel sunlight again. She will. The weight of it all settled over us, not the anger or even the fear, just the clarity, the certainty of having done everything right, by the book, by the system, and still being forced to wage war just to be left alone. Maella tapped the backup case folder. Next HOA meeting is Friday. If the state moves fast, she'll be served by then. I looked out at the porch through the front window. Valora's house was 2 doors down. Her SUV sat parked, perfectly centered between the driveway lines. Still, untouched. She had no idea what was already en route. She didn't know that the override logs were sealed, that Darren had flipped, that the print match was confirmed by 2 independent analysts, and that every motion she made from this point on was being watched by people who didn't care how neat her flower beds were. The morning we put the cradle back out was quiet, not peaceful, just still in that way right before a storm. Hits. Maella wiped the bamboo slats with alcohol wipes, careful not to smudge the initials her father had carved into the base. I tightened the bolts into the porch deck while the UV shade clicked into place overhead. Elia stayed inside, asleep. She didn't know the cradle was back. She didn't know this porch had become a battleground. But we did. I ran a full test on the porch system. Motion sensors, temp logs, bottle station sync, gate access ping, all green. The override trap was active now. If Valora used that key again, the system would log the handshake, capture her signal, and push the entire log set to our forensic backup node in real time. One more step, and she'd bury herself. Maella checked the secure feed on her phone. Darren just texted, says Valora filed an internal maintenance request yesterday, coded it as a gate calibration check. Which unit? I asked. Ours? There it was. The final move. I glanced at the camera on the porch. How fast can you get the forensic alert system armed? It's already armed, she said. I almost smiled. We didn't go anywhere that day. Just stayed in the living room, watching the porch cam on a side monitor while Elia napped in her wrap beside us. Every motion alert made my heart pound, but none of them were her. Until 1:43 p.m., the gate clicked open, not the usual beep of code entry, the low, mechanical chirp of an override. My screen lit up. Unauthorized legacy access detected. 231A signature match. I watched as Valora stepped inside the porch boundary like she had every right to be there. She moved casually, like she was just another neighbor stopping by for air. Then she reached for the cradle. Maela hit the record lock on the feed. Valora crouched, adjusted something near the bottle unit, then took a photo. Her fingers lingered longer than necessary. Her eyes flicked around, once, twice, before she stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked out the gate. The latch clicked shut. The system finished uploading the footage. I stood, grabbed the secondary flash drive, and began syncing the new data into the physical evidence chain. Gate access log, override ping, footage, frame-by-frame breakdown, touchpoint tracking, time-stamped stills of her fingers on the cradle. Maela was already sealing the new envelope for the AG's office. She just confirmed the overrides still in her possession, she said. They'll move now. I added the new footage to the CPS evidence folder too, just in case. By sunset, we had the final version of the full case packet. No speculation, no accusations, only proof. Override use, caught in the act. Tampering with medically designated equipment. Trespass after formal HOA override opt-out. Print match to previously tampered bottle. Forged board approvals. Pattern of repeated access violations across multiple households. The system didn't need motive anymore. It had mechanism. By nightfall, Rhonda stopped by. She didn't come up the steps, just stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, staring at the cradle. She tried to get into mine too, she said quietly. Last week, I found my baby monitor unplugged. I nodded. You keep the footage? Yeah, not great quality, but I'm handing it over. Do it fast, I said. She won't have long now. Maela stepped out with a sealed folder. For you, she told Rhonda, in case you want to file directly. It's already notarized. Rhonda took it, eyes wide. You two don't mess around. Neither does she, Maela said. The street fell quiet again after that. We sat on the porch, both of us side by side, staring at the cradle like it might breathe on its own. No one else came by. But the footage had already moved, to the state, to the Child Welfare Board, to the agency that licensed Valora 20 years ago and would be revoking everything she ever touched. She could deny words, but she couldn't erase her own hand, caught in the act. Friday came hotter than expected. The sun clung to the rooftops like it wanted to press down on everything. Even the neighborhood sprinklers seemed slower, misting uselessly into the air. The HOA board meeting was scheduled for 5:30 p.m. at the Briar Glen Community Center. Every homeowner was welcome to attend. Few ever did. That night was different. By the time I parked across the street, there were already more cars than usual. Families, parents, a few elderly couples. People who normally avoided these meetings like the plague had suddenly made time. They'd all seen the last HOA memo, the veiled accusations, the subtle shift in language. Valora had tried to soften the blow ahead of whatever fallout she feared was coming. Too late. Inside, the folding chairs were half filled. At the front of the room sat the HOA board behind a long white table. Valora sat in the middle, pale blue blazer, her usual clipboard laid neatly before her, calm, pleased, like nothing had happened. Maela entered with me. She wore her badge clipped discreetly inside her purse, not to show it, just to remind herself what this was. Not revenge, not neighborhood drama. This was procedure. When the meeting opened, Valora ran through the typical motions. Budget allocations, community landscaping updates, a mention of a planned winter festival. Her voice never wavered. She was good at this, commanding space with that tight tone of maternal superiority that had always made neighbors feel small. Then came the segment titled Resident Concerns. I stood. Thorne Elric, I said, clear and audible. Her eyes flicked toward me, and something shifted in her posture. So subtle most would miss it, but I saw it, recognition. Then dread. You have the floor, she said tightly. I stepped forward but didn't go far. I didn't need to speak long. On the night of August 3rd, my property was accessed using an override key that had been decommissioned under HOA Resolution 22B. That resolution was signed by this board, by you, I said, nodding to Valora. Despite this, the key remained in use. Our family had opted out of override access as documented in the move-in protocol. The room was still, chairs shifted, whispers stirred at the edges. I reached into my bag and pulled out the sealed folder. Mayela handed me the second copy. I'm submitting this to the HOA board as required under Section 4.1 of the Homeowner Redress Clause. It contains forensic evidence confirming that the override was used without board approval on private property to access medically regulated feeding equipment. That action directly preceded my infant daughter's hospitalization. The substance found in her bottle was a sedative. A fingerprint was lifted. That fingerprint matches a former municipal health inspector who currently serves on this board. No one moved, not even Valora. The silence was louder than any protest. I'm also delivering a second packet, Mayela said, stepping forward. This one has already been submitted to the state, to the CPS investigators, and to the Office of the Attorney General. She placed the envelope on the table, soft, final. Valora didn't reach for it. She stared straight ahead, her hands motionless over the edge of the clipboard. I have a motion, said one of the board members at the far end, someone I didn't know. An older man, gray hair, tired eyes. To place Vice President Finch under immediate suspension pending external legal investigation. A few seconds passed. Then another voice. Seconded. Thirded, said someone else. Valora finally looked at me. Her mouth opened like she was about to speak, but no words came. The motion passed. She stood slowly, gathered her clipboard, and walked out of the room without a word. No one stopped her. No one looked away either. The second she left, 3 more residents stood and demanded review of prior citations, override access reports, and voting logs. By the time the meeting ended, the board had voted to initiate an internal audit. The silence Valora left behind was filled with paperwork, questions, and neighbors who suddenly realized they'd been living under rules no one agreed to. We didn't cheer, we didn't gloat. We just went home and put Elia to sleep under the soft hum of the porch cradle light. Valora Finch was arrested in front of her house at 9:14 the next morning. No sirens, no dramatic yelling, just 2 unmarked cars, a calm walk to the porch, and the unmistakable posture of someone caught in the moment between control and collapse. I watched from the sidewalk. So did half the neighborhood. She didn't resist, didn't even argue. She turned to lock her door like she was headed to a board meeting, but the officer beside her didn't wait. He took her wrist gently and clipped the cuff. Her clipboard dropped to the ground with a hollow slap, papers scattering across the brick path like the pieces of an act finally ending. They read her the charges aloud: criminal trespass, tampering with medical equipment, child endangerment, unlawful use of a restricted security credential. I didn't need to hear the rest. I already knew what was in the report. Mayela and I had written half of it. As Valora was guided down the steps, she looked up, briefly. Our eyes met, not in challenge, not even anger, just quiet disbelief, like she'd truly thought none of this could touch her, like the porch, the cradle, and the baby had all just been inconveniences. She was wrong. The board held an emergency meeting later that day, not in the community center. This time, they met under the front awning, in the shade, surrounded by residents with folded arms and folded documents. No microphone, no snacks, just accountability. Darren was there too. He stood off to the side, his face unreadable, hands clasped in front of him. The board didn't address him, but they didn't ignore him either. They knew who had made the call, who had passed the registry, who had flipped the moment it counted. One of the newer board members, Eva, a retired nurse, spoke first. I move that all override access protocols be suspended until a third-party audit determines eligibility and legal compliance. Unanimous, someone added. All past override entries are to be cataloged, matched with homeowner complaints, and reviewed by legal counsel. Another vote. Passed. A third. All HOA citations issued solely under Valora Finch's authority in the last 12 months are to be declared void pending review. That one got applause. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. When it was over, Rhonda came up beside me. She didn't say anything for a while, just watched as the board dissolved into side conversations and scattered paperwork. She used that same key on me, she finally said. 3 times. I didn't realize what I was looking at until your footage showed the gate ping. You have a copy of our chain files, I said. She nodded. Already submitted. I talked to 3 other parents. All of them had citations that didn't match meeting records. It wasn't just about control, it was targeted. Families, I said quietly. Vulnerabilities, she corrected. She looked for where we were weakest. I looked past her to the house 2 doors down. Valora's windows were closed now, blinds drawn. The yard, once obsessively trimmed, was still. No movement, no perfection left to uphold. That evening, Maela and I sat on the porch again. The cradle rocked gently in the breeze. Elia slept beneath the UV-filtered shade, a soft hum from the monitor playing her steady breath back to us like music. "Think they'll change the rules?" Maela asked. "They already did," I said. "People showed up." She leaned her head against my shoulder, quiet for a long time. "I'm glad we didn't move." "So, am I?" The porch light flicked on as the sun dipped below the street line. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the urge to check the gate logs. I didn't watch the street. I didn't think about override keys or fingerprints or panic texts in the middle of the night. I just sat and watched my daughter sleep, protected not by fear, but by truth. 2 weeks passed before Aaliyah reached for the cradle slat again. Her tiny fingers curled around the bamboo like she remembered it. The porch was warm that morning, filtered through the UV tent Maela had re-secured the night before. Everything felt still, restored, but not untouched. We didn't speak about Valora much after the arrest. There wasn't anything left to say. The charges were official. The override key was entered into evidence. CPS had closed their investigation with a written acknowledgement, parental actions consistent with medical necessity and legal boundaries. No cause for concern. I framed that letter, hung it in the hallway where sunlight hit it around noon, not as a trophy, as a line in the sand. That week, Briar Glen Ridge did something it had never done before. It sent out a survey, not a memo, not a citation threat, a real survey, one that asked residents what they believed the HOA's job should be: safety, cleanliness, family support. I read through the responses that leaked into the neighborhood group chats. People didn't hold back. Don't weaponize rules. Respect medical needs. Don't assume authority is correctness. Some even asked if override access should be banned completely. I didn't weigh in, not because I didn't care, because we'd already done our part. The porch logs were still live, still archiving every ping, not out of paranoia anymore, but permanence. The system was smarter now, less about defense, more about proof. If it ever happened again, the next parent wouldn't have to start from zero. They'd know what to do. Darren stopped by that Friday. He stood at the edge of the steps, hands in his jacket again, but he didn't look like he was shrinking this time. "I'm leaving the HOA," he said. "Took a job with a private firm, tech compliance audits." I nodded. "Good fit." He glanced at the cradle, then back to me. "You know, I should have said something earlier, the night I saw her, before all this." "You did," I said, "when it counted." He didn't try to say more, just nodded and walked back down the path, the sound of his footsteps soft against the concrete. That night, Maela printed the final archive log from our case. It showed every action from the first bottle sensor alert to Valora's override ping, fingerprint match, and board suspension. She placed it in a fireproof binder, snapped it shut, and stored it next to Elia's hospital records. "We keep it," she said, "but we don't have to open it again." Elia stirred in her bassinet, half asleep, one tiny foot poking out from the swaddle. Maela kissed her forehead. I stepped outside to lock the gate. Everything was quiet, no keys turning, no shadows on the sidewalk, just the soft hum of night settling over a neighborhood that had learned something the hard way. The porch light buzzed once, then held steady. That was the end of it. But not for everyone. Somewhere out there, someone else is watching their child sleep in a cradle they built themselves. Somewhere, another HOA board is misusing power, cloaking cruelty in guidelines. To those parents, stay sharp, document everything, protect what matters, and never let someone with a clipboard convince you your child is an inconvenience. If this story meant something to you, let us know where you're watching from. Subscribe for more true stories that expose what happens when control goes too far, and how ordinary families take it back.